It was sleek, elegant, and years ahead of its time. Yet, it was born in the middle of the most brutal war in human history. The FG42 was the weapon of Germany's elite Fallschirmjäger, a gun designed to be the perfect blend of rifle accuracy and machine gun firepower. On paper, it was unstoppable. In reality, it was a costly gamble that came at a devastating price. This is the story of how one rifle promised to change the battlefield forever, but ended up revealing the dark truth about what happens when genius meets desperation. We'll uncover the daring missions it was built for, the secrets of its revolutionary design, and later in this video, the shocking reason this masterpiece became a symbol of both innovation and failure. Before the FG42, German paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, were a paradox. They were elite soldiers trained for lightning-fast airborne assaults, but they hit the ground underarmed. Their standard-issue weapon during early airborne operations was the Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle. Powerful, yes, but slow to fire, and useless when faced with sudden close-quarters chaos. The very tactics that made them famous, dropping deep behind enemy lines, seizing airfields and strongpoints, meant they needed firepower immediately after landing. But German parachute harnesses of the time forced them to jump without their rifles slung. Weapons were dropped in separate containers, sometimes landing hundreds of meters away. The result? Many Fallschirmjäger hit the ground carrying only pistols or submachine guns, and these were no match for entrenched defenders. The problem became painfully obvious during the 1941 invasion of Crete. The Fallschirmjäger captured their objectives, but at staggering cost. Thousands dead or wounded in just days. The lesson was brutal. If Germany wanted airborne troops to survive, they needed a weapon that could be carried on the jump, used instantly upon landing, and deliver both long-range precision and suppressive automatic fire. Commanders wanted something that combined the accuracy of a rifle, the punch of a full-power cartridge, and the rate of fire of a light machine gun. But light enough for a paratrooper to actually carry. That was the impossible wish list. What came next was a design request that would give birth to the FG42, a gun so advanced that decades later, weapon designers would still borrow from it. But as we'll see in a moment, solving one problem created a whole new set of them, and the price would be higher than anyone imagined. The FG42, short for Fallschirmjägergewehr 42, was the brainchild of Louis Stange, working for Rheinmetall Borsig. From the moment the prototype hit the drawing board in 1942, it was clear this wasn't just another weapon. It was a radical rethinking of what an infantry rifle could be. Chambered in 7.92 by 5.7 mm Mauser, the same full-power cartridge as the German Army's standard rifles and machine guns, it had the stopping power to punch through cover and hit hard at long ranges. But unlike a bolt-action rifle, the FG42 was gas-operated, magazine-fed, and capable of both semi-automatic and fully automatic fire. Its design was a mix of influences: part battle rifle, part light machine gun, part paratrooper carbine. The most striking feature was the side-mounted 20-round box magazine, which kept the weapon's profile slim when firing from prone positions. It had a folding bipod for stability, a pistol grip for control, and a surprisingly compact overall length, making it ideal for paratroopers on cramped plains or in rough landings. The German engineers even factored in controllability by firing semi-auto from a closed bolt and full auto from an open bolt, an ingenious solution for heat management and accuracy. But this brilliance came with complexity. The FG42 required precision machining, exotic materials, and skilled labor. Resources Germany was quickly running out of by 1943. Still, The weapon's appearance on the battlefield caused a stir. Allied soldiers who captured them were amazed, calling it one of the finest combat rifles they'd ever seen. Yet even as the FG42 wowed gun experts, the seeds of its downfall were already sown. As we'll explore next, Germany's desperate strategic position meant that perfect weapons weren't always the right weapons. The FG42's first real combat use came in the brutal mountains of Italy in 1943, when Fallschirmjäger units used them during fierce defensive actions at places like Monte Cassino. Here, the weapon's strength shone. Its ability to switch between accurate single shots to suppressive bursts allowed small squads to hold positions against larger Allied forces. Paratroopers could fire prone with the bipod or engage moving targets with the pistol grip, all without switching weapons. Allied troops learned quickly that if they heard the distinctive bark of the FG42, they were up against elite, well-armed opponents. In Normandy, the FG42 again proved its worth, especially in the hands of the 2nd Fallschirmjäger Division. Snipers often fitted them with ZF-4 scopes, turning them into deadly designated marksman rifles. However, this was also where the rifle's weaknesses began to surface, under the relentless pressure of Allied firepower. Its full-power cartridge generated significant recoil in full auto, making sustained bursts difficult to control. Worse, the complex, finely machined components were vulnerable to dirt and mud, conditions that were everywhere in the bocage. Maintenance in the field was a nightmare, and spare parts were scarce. By mid-1944, it was clear that while the FG42 could give a paratrooper unmatched versatility, it was a nightmare to mass produce in the numbers needed. Only a few thousand were ever made, and those were reserved for elite units. This exclusivity gave it almost mythical status among soldiers, but it also meant it could never change the war's outcome. And as we'll see in the next section, the very qualities that made the FG42 exceptional were the same ones that doomed it. The FG42 was not just a weapon. It was a collection of innovations packed into one rifle, many of which were decades ahead of their time. One of its most brilliant design features was its dual-mode firing system: semi-automatic fire from a closed bolt for accuracy, and full automatic fire from an open bolt to reduce overheating and cook-offs. At a time when most rifles were still manually operated, this was cutting-edge engineering. Its compact length, just over a meter, meant it could be handled in tight spaces, whether dropping from a transport plane or fighting through rubble-filled streets. The side-mounted magazine allowed paratroopers to stay low while firing prone, a lifesaver when every inch of profile could mean the difference between living and dying. Even the rifle's ergonomics were years ahead. The pistol grip gave a natural firing stance, and the built-in bipod transformed it from a rifle into a light support weapon in seconds. The FG42's iron sights were clear and precise, and the option to mount optics gave Fallschirmjäger squads organic long-range capability without relying on dedicated sniper teams. These design choices reflected a clear understanding of what paratroopers needed: versatility, mobility, and concentrated firepower. But there was a catch. To achieve this level of precision, the FG42 had to be made with high-quality steel and specialized machining. It wasn't stamped out like the later STG-44. It was milled, assembled, and finished to a standard that simply wasn't sustainable in a war economy being crushed by Allied bombing. The result? Each FG-42 was a marvel, but also an expensive gamble. By the time a single rifle rolled out of the factory, the same resources could have produced several simpler weapons. The genius of its design was undeniable. But genius doesn't win wars if it can't be mass-produced. And that, as we'll see, became its fatal flaw. On the battlefield, the FG-42 was a paradox. In the hands of a skilled Fallschirmjäger, it could dominate a fight, delivering devastating firepower at any range. Yet that same firepower exposed its biggest flaw: control. The full-power 7.92 by 5.7mm Mauser cartridge was brutal in automatic fire. Even with the bipod deployed, sustained bursts were difficult to keep on target. Standing or moving, the recoil was enough to throw shots wide, wasting precious ammunition and forcing soldiers to fire in short, disciplined bursts. This made it less of a true machine gun and more of a rapid-fire rifle. The complexity of the weapon also meant it wasn't soldier-proof. Mud, sand, or even fine dust could foul the moving parts, especially the gas system. In the rain-soaked trenches of Italy or the muddy fields of Normandy, that was a death sentence. And then there was the logistical nightmare. Magazines were unique to the FG42, meaning resupply often depended on recovering them from the battlefield. Break apart in the field, and you couldn't just swap it from another common weapon. You had to hope the armorers had spares, which was rare. The FG42 also drew attention, and not in a good way. Allied troops quickly recognized its silhouette and the elite status of its users. That meant any soldier carrying one instantly became a priority target. Many Fallschirmjäger learned to hide their FG42s under captured Allied ponchos or cloth wraps until the moment they fired, hoping to avoid becoming a sniper's first pick. This is where the dark truth emerges. The FG42 gave its users incredible power, but also painted a bullseye on their backs. It was a weapon that made you deadly, but also doomed you. The FG42's downfall wasn't just about recoil or battlefield wear, it was about numbers, or rather, the lack of them. Early versions, like the Type E, were painstakingly milled and machined from high-grade steel, driving up production time and cost. In a war where Germany was already desperate for more weapons, producing a rifle that cost several times more than a Kar 98K or MP40 was a logistical nightmare. Later variants, like the Type G, attempted to cut costs by using stamped components and simplified parts. But by then, Allied bombing campaigns had crippled production facilities. Estimates suggest only around 7,000 to 9,000 FG42s were ever made. Tiny numbers compared to the millions of rifles fielded by the Allies. This meant the weapon never reached beyond the elite Fallschirmjäger units, robbing it of any chance to influence the wider war. Even within those units, supply was uneven. Some paratroopers carried the FG42. Others still relied on MP40s or captured weapons. The dream of a universal, do-it-all paratrooper rifle was never realized. There was also the stark economic reality. By 1944, Germany was fighting a defensive war on multiple fronts, hemorrhaging resources. Every FG42 built represented a choice not to produce more practical mass-issue weapons like the STG-44 or MG-42. Commanders and quartermasters began to see it as a luxury item. Impressive, yes, but ultimately a symbol of wasted potential. The genius idea had turned into an impossible dream, and the war was no longer the place for dreams. By late 1944, the FG42's future was already sealed. The very battlefield it was designed for, rapid airborne assaults into lightly defended areas, was disappearing. Germany's days of surprise airborne offensives were over. Now, Fallschirmjäger units were being used as elite infantry in brutal defensive battles. Instead of quick strikes, they were dug into trenches, holding against overwhelming Allied artillery, tanks, and air power. In this role, the FG42's specialized design made less sense. The weapon was still powerful, but paratroopers weren't parachuting behind enemy lines anymore. They were fighting in mud, rubble, and forests, where a simpler, more rugged weapon often outperformed a finely tuned masterpiece. On the Eastern Front, the problem was even more pronounced. In the frozen conditions of winter or the choking dust of summer, the FG42's precision-machined parts could seize or jam. Soviet troops wielding cheap, reliable PPS-41 submachine guns could unleash torrents of fire with little worry about maintenance. German paratroopers armed with FG42s might have had better range and accuracy, but when surrounded by massed fire, that advantage evaporated. The war was shifting towards volume of fire, mobility, and ease of replacement, three areas where the FG42 was out of step. By the war's final months, many Fallschirmjäger had swapped their FG42s for STG-44 assault rifles, which offered controllable automatic fire and easier logistics. Some soldiers even turned in their FG42s voluntarily, preferring a weapon that could be fed from common magazines and handled rough conditions without complaint. The rifle that had once been the pride of Germany's airborne forces was fading into the background, its era already over before the war had ended. While the FG42 failed to change the outcome of World War II, its influence on firearms design didn't end with Germany's surrender. Allied engineers who examined captured rifles were astonished at the ingenuity packed into such a compact frame. The U.S. military in particular took notes. Elements of the FG42's layout and mechanics would later inspire the American M60 machine gun, especially its side-mounted feed system and general operating principles. Decades later, aspects of the FG42's ergonomics and balance could be seen in modern battle rifles and designated marksman weapons. Collectors and historians today consider the FG42 one of the most advanced infantry weapons of the war, precisely because it tried to bridge the gap between rifle and light machine gun. Its dual-mode firing system, folding bipod, and optical compatibility foreshadowed many of the features now standard on modern infantry rifles. But its legacy is also a cautionary tale. In trying to create the perfect weapon, Germany had made one that was too complex, too expensive, and too specialized to survive in a total war environment. Post-war, surviving FG42s became rare collector's items, some fetching astronomical prices at auctions. Museums display them not just as artifacts of German engineering, but as symbols of what happens when military innovation is pushed to its extreme limits. They are reminders that battlefield reality often crushes even the most brilliant ideas. And as we'll see in our final section, the FG42 story isn't just about technology. It's about the soldiers who carried them and the cost they paid. The FG42 remains one of history's great what-if weapons. In theory, it gave the Fallschirmjäger everything they needed: range, power, and versatility in a single package. In practice, it was a victim of its own ambition. The rifle was too expensive to mass-produce, too complex to thrive in harsh conditions, and too specialized for a war that was rapidly evolving beyond its intended purpose. For the paratroopers who carried it, the FG42 was both a blessing and a curse. It could give them a fighting chance against overwhelming odds, but it also made them stand out as targets and tied them to a weapon that could be difficult to maintain in the field. The genius of the FG42 was in its vision, imagining a single rifle that could replace multiple weapons. The disaster was in the timing. Introduced when Germany was already on the defensive, it never had the chance to fulfill its potential in the type of airborne warfare it was made for. Instead, it became a rare, almost mythical weapon, remembered more for what it represented than for what it achieved. Today, the FG42 is studied by historians, engineers, and soldiers alike, not just as a technical marvel, but as a lesson. War doesn't always reward the most advanced technology. Sometimes it rewards what is simple, reliable, and easy to make in massive numbers. The FG42 was a rifle caught between two worlds, the dream of perfection and the reality of war. And in that tension, it found both its brilliance and its downfall.